We lived in a very nice area of Berlin, and I lived with my parents and my grandmother, my mother's mother, who had been divorced at a young age and who lived with us. And as I said, I'm an only child. That morning, and I remember it very clearly, even though it's a long time ago, that morning, my father was in the textile business. He was a representative of various textile firms in Berlin, for various textile firms. My mother helped him in his office at home, and I went to school. That morning, November 8th, during the morning, when the bell rang, two SS men, German guys, came to arrest my father. My grandmother, she was elderly but very clever and very smart, and the fact that we got away without my father being taken away is all due to her clever way of handling it. That's what I believe to this day. I know that. They came and they said they have a warrant or whatever paper they showed for his arrest. My grandmother called me out of my room, and this I recall so vividly, and it's so long ago. I came out of my room and I had to make a curtsy, like a little, for these guys, which I did. And then my grandmother proceeded to tell them that my father was not here, he was out on business, or I don't know what she told them, and that he's a wonderful family man, and I'm an only child, and she sort of pleaded for their sympathy. These guys had no sympathy, what do they care? So then, after a while of this, and I think she handled it very well, after a while of this, they said, well, we will come back. You tell them we were here, and we will come back for him. And they left. We somehow got in touch. My mother hadn't been home either. I don't know where she was, but my father was out on business. We then, somehow when my mother came back, told her, of course, what had happened, and my parents decided that not to take a chance, and so my father spent at least 2 or 3 weeks at a home of a non-Jewish friend of my grandmother's, who offered him her hospitality, her home, and he slept there. And when he wanted to come home anytime, he always called first, whether the coast is clear, whether he can come home. So that was what I remember very, very well. And we never heard from them again, but it being November 38, we realized, of course, that things were getting worse in Germany. The reason we did not leave Germany right then and there were 2 reasons. One was that my mother did not want to separate from her elderly mother. She had been with her all her life. She had lived with us. She couldn't bear the thought of leaving this woman who was then about 75, 76, alone. Second thing was that the quota for America was so bad. I was born in Berlin, but my father was born in a small town, what is now Poland, which at the time when he was born was Germany. A lot of people came from that area, and he'd been in Berlin for years and years with his family. But the Americans put him on a Polish quota. And me, who have never seen Poland, and I was born and raised in Berlin, had to go on the Polish quota too, because I was my father's child. That's how it worked. Didn't matter, anything else didn't matter. And these quotas were so bad that it looked like we had a cousin in Texas, in Fort Worth, Texas, a cousin of my mother's, and she wanted us to come to Texas because her husband ran a little department store in Texas and figured my father, knowing the garment industry, would help him, and this was all planned. But even though she gave us the necessary affidavit and all that, they had to prove how much money they had in the bank and all this business, but in spite of that, our the quota for Poland was, I guess, even worse for Polish people than for German people. So Dad and I were on a Polish quota. My mother was on the German quota. She had been born in Hamburg in Germany. And so we waited and waited and couldn't realize it was not getting any better. I had stopped going. I went to a Jewish school at that point. Maybe I should tell a little about that. Already in 1935, when I was 10, we had lived in a different area of Berlin, and I went to a regular public school but I encountered, and I can't detail it, but I did encounter anti-Semitism there. And then the law that Jewish children can no longer attend regular schools must have come out in that year. It didn't first come out in 1938, it came out earlier. So, because many people then started to look for Jewish schools that were run by a Jewish headmaster or so, and there were in Berlin at least 4 or 5 very good, excellent Jewish schools. So that's one of the reasons we moved to Schöneberg, which is the place, it's the area in Berlin where President Kennedy said, "I am a Berliner." That's the city hall there. Anyway, we moved to Schöneberg, and the Jewish school, private school, my parents paid for it, Zickelschule is the name, was located right on the same street that we lived. We were number 8, the school was number 16, so I could fall out of bed and be right in school. But there were other Jewish schools that were excellent. And the children, I must say, the children that I met in that Jewish school, and it's a great part of my life, those who are still alive, we're all getting older, but I'm still in touch. Not all are in America, some are in England, some are in other countries. One of my best friends is in South America. I'm still in touch with all of them. We had this very good feeling of, we didn't have any, obviously, no anti-Semitism. We felt comfortable. Miss Zickel, the headmistress of the school, was taken away and killed. She died, but in a concentration camp, I don't know where. But it was a great feeling that you were happy at school and, had your friends. And they had an English teacher who they imported. That's really a Miss Riley and a Mr. Dobson, 2 English teachers who came from England and taught English. So basically my English I learned already in Germany at the school. Might not have been perfect, but we all had crushes on these 2 teachers, So coming back to the Jewish school, that was perfect. And the Jewish school was dissolved in all schools, closed in, I think in the summer of about May or June 1938, those schools closed. No, 39. Now, my parents, since the quota was so impossible and nothing was being really done to help us, the aunt in Texas certainly couldn't do more, my mother had a good friend whom she knew from years ago, from her childhood, an English lady, and who lived in London, quite well-to-do, and she said she can take us to London, to England, to her house, for the interim time until our quota is called, until we're ready to get our visa to go to America. And that saved my parents' life and my life. If she hadn't done it, we probably would have ended up in a concentration camp. But while I was there, war broke out. September 3rd, war was declared, and we had arrived in London a few days before war broke out. In fact, I remember very vividly my parents going on a walk through Hyde Park in London, and I was back in this little, boarding house or whatever, like where we stayed at first. And I was so worried because war broke out and they started to bomb London like an hour later. And I was playing ping pong with somebody, I don't know what, and I was scared stiff until I saw my parents again. anyway, that was the time in England was okay. I met nice people, and we were happy. And then we came to America in September 10th, 1940. We arrived in New York. Then when we came to America, we had no money. We were also met by some friends at the boat here. My parents then stayed a few nights in a place that was down on Lafayette Street. I stayed there too. The HIAS, the organization HIAS, H-I-A-S, provided new refugees, so to speak, a cover, a bed, a room for 1 or 2 nights or a couple of nights until you could get oriented and find your own place. And then my parents moved right away after we found an apartment. First, we found 2 furnished rooms on Fort Washington Avenue in Washington Heights, 1 room for me, 1 room for my parents. I went to George Washington High School. The funny part is that one of the first people I met when I was in New York going to high school was not my husband, but another survivor, Hannah Eisner, who's one of the survivors who is on our panel here. In George Washington High School, I was very happy because it was a nice school and within walking distance, and I met a lot of people that I am still friendly with too. So I have friends from Germany and I have friends from high school here, and that's a long time. My grandmother died when we left her in a Jewish old age home in Berlin. And we corresponded with her until it was no longer possible to get mail from Germany when the war broke out. But we had some non-Jewish relatives who visited her and made sure she was all right, and she was fine. She died a natural death, so we were told. My mother was always, I can't tell you. When we heard about concentration camps, at first you didn't hear all that in America, but when news leaked through and you heard it, naturally she was worried, so were we. But we heard that she died in that old age home in 1942. Which means she was 82 years old when she died of a natural death. And that's been verified by an aunt I had in Berlin who was not Jewish, who was married to my father's brother, who was non-Jewish, but told us. So my mother never saw her again, and it's the worst thing to happen. Now, my father's brother, I've looked in all the books, even here at the temple. They have some books they have books here, these big books, who died and where my father's brother and his wife were deported from Berlin. And I can't even find out whether it was to Riga, where a cousin of mine died, but it just says the German word verschollen, which means missing, And I don't know. We never found out where they were taken to. They were killed. And my favorite cousin, Rolf, was taken to Riga with his mother and killed there. And this was my favorite cousin, and he wanted to always go to England and meet me in England. He made all those plans. We'll meet in London. Well, nothing came of that, so. But I want to say, really, to you and to anyone, that I'm, as bad as it was with the concentration camp of relatives and with Kristallnacht, as bad as it was, I was not an unhappy person. We came over to London, and I adjusted to whatever life had to offer. My parents were very wonderful. Since I was an only child, I was spoiled. My husband talks about being spoiled, but I was doubly spoiled. And I've had a good life. And wonderful kids. So in a way, as Charlie says, I feel lucky.